My name is Charlotte Whitmore, though most people who have known me over the years call me Kathy. I am 65 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, and a widow who has tried her best to hold on to the simple dignity of a quiet life. For most of my years, I believed that family was the anchor keeping me steady. I never imagined that the very people I sacrificed everything for would one day plot my removal as if I were nothing more than a burden. On the evening of my daughter's birthday, I arrived carrying a homemade pie, the kind I used to make for her when she was a little girl with frosting on her cheeks and bright eyes filled with delight. I stood in the hallway, pausing for just a moment to steady my breath. From inside, I could hear laughter, glasses clinking, the hum of music, and then, slicing through it all, a whisper. My daughter's voice, hushed but sharp, speaking to her husband. "When will she finally be out of our lives?" The words struck like a blade between my ribs. I froze, my hands tightening on the dish I carried. That whisper was not meant for my ears, but it landed with the force of betrayal, echoing through years of motherhood, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. I had not been invited into the celebration so much as tolerated, a presence to be endured, but I didn't step back. I didn't walk away. I opened the door and walked inside. The room was filled with smiling faces and glittering decorations, yet the air shifted the moment I appeared. I saw my daughter, Marissa, in her elegant dress, her hand resting on Victor's arm. Her smile faltered just a fraction before she composed herself again. My granddaughter, Lila, glanced at me but quickly looked down at her phone. The guests offered polite nods, then returned to their conversations as if I were invisible. I placed the pie on the side table and tried to smile, though my heart pounded in my chest. Marissa lifted her glass for a toast. "To family," she declared, her eyes sweeping past me as if I were a ghost. The laughter rang again, but it no longer sounded like joy. It sounded like a wall closing in around me. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the chair no one else wanted, empty around me, heavy with silence. I remembered the hours spent hemming her dresses for school dances, the nights I worked extra tutoring jobs so she could attend college without debt, the retirement savings I dipped into so she and Victor could buy their house. And here I was, reduced to a shadow at my own daughter's birthday, treated like an afterthought, unwanted and unseen. But the whisper still echoed in my ears. When will she finally be out of our lives? They thought I wouldn't hear. They thought I would sit quietly, accept my place on the edges, and fade away. What they did not know was that their careless cruelty was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. If you've ever found yourself sidelined, dismissed, or quietly erased by the people you loved most, then you will understand why I didn't leave that night. I walked into that party carrying not only a pie, but a plan forming inside me, even if I couldn't name it yet. This is not just the story of humiliation. It is the story of how I answered that whisper, with a life they could never erase. And before I continue, let me invite you to stay with me through this journey. If you find yourself moved by stories of women reclaiming their worth, of dignity rediscovered in silence and strength, then I hope you'll keep listening, share this story, and walk with me through what came next. Because everything shifted the moment I chose not to turn away from that hallway. The moment I stepped inside with the truth ringing in my ears, my daughter's secret birthday whisper became the final mistake that would change all of our lives. I sat at the end of the long dining table, the chair that seemed to have been placed there just for me. Far enough from the laughter, tucked away in the corner where shadows stretched along the wall. The pie I had carried so carefully rested untouched on the sideboard, ignored among the trays of catered food and sparkling glasses of wine. The room was lit with warm light, but I felt the chill of exclusion seep through my bones as if I were sitting outside on a winter porch. Marissa raised her glass again, her smile bright, her voice ringing with charm. "To family," she said, tilting her glass toward the faces around her. Her eyes danced across the table, stopping at Victor's, then at Lila's, then circling the circle of friends and colleagues gathered. But not once did her gaze fall on me. She toasted to family while deliberately erasing her own mother from the definition. The irony settled heavily in my chest, heavier than the weight of years. Lila rushed past me as the toast ended, her laughter mingling with her friends, her hair brushing my arm as she darted by without a single acknowledgement. She was 16, caught between girlhood and womanhood, and I reminded myself not to judge her too harshly. Still, the sting of her indifference pricked me deeper than I expected. When she was little, I had been the one who kept her busy with games while Marissa prepared for court, the one who stayed up late to mend the stuffed animals she refused to part with. Now she swept by me as if I were invisible, her phone lighting up her face with more importance than her grandmother's presence. The conversations at the table carried on without me. Victor told a story about a courtroom victory, embellishing his cleverness, earning applause and knowing chuckles from Marissa's colleagues. I picked at the edges of the napkin in my lap, forcing a smile whenever someone glanced vaguely in my direction, though their eyes quickly shifted away. The clatter of forks and the rhythm of overlapping voices made a music I was no longer part of. My chair became a symbol, I realized, not just a piece of furniture. It was the empty chair of belonging, a space no one wished to share, a place assigned to someone tolerated but no longer valued. It was humiliating to sit there, to feel the deliberate distance created by my own daughter. It wasn't a slip of forgetfulness. It was intentional, as clear as the whisper I had heard in the hallway. When will she finally be out of our lives? The answer was written here, in the cold geography of the table. I took a sip of water, my throat tight, and forced myself to breathe evenly. My mother had once told me that humiliation, when born silently, could teach you the shape of people's hearts. I understood now what she meant. This moment wasn't only about being excluded from a birthday celebration. It was about the years of dismissal slowly crystallizing into something undeniable. As the plates were passed, I noticed how Marissa's smile lingered on Victor, how she laughed a little louder at his jokes, how she leaned in when others praised him. When she finally glanced my way, it was fleeting, a courtesy look, the kind you'd give to a stranger you didn't wish to offend. She did not ask if I enjoyed the food. She did not ask if I was comfortable. She didn't need to. She had already spoken the truth in the hallway. The candlelight flickered across faces filled with joy, faces who belonged, faces who mattered. I felt like the lone shadow at the edge of the glow, a ghost at my daughter's feast. I traced the rim of my glass with my finger, remembering another birthday long ago when Marissa had begged for a handmade dollhouse. I stayed up 3 nights to build it from wood, painting the walls, sewing curtains from old fabric. She had squealed with delight when she saw it, throwing her arms around my neck. "You're the best mom in the world," she had said. I swallowed hard against the memory, for now she was the woman who could look through me as if I were air. When dessert was served, my pie was untouched. No one moved toward it, not even out of politeness. Instead, slices of glossy chocolate cake were passed around, Victor feeding Marissa a bite while laughter circled the table. My pie, made with care, with the recipe her grandmother had handed down, sat abandoned. It was not just food ignored, it was history disregarded, tradition discarded. I shifted in my chair, the wood pressing uncomfortably against my back, the cushion thin, offering no support. My body mirrored my place in their lives, still present, still bearing weight, but no longer cared for, no longer softened by kindness. I realized that Marissa wanted me to feel this emptiness, to see myself excluded, to taste the bitterness of her rejection. Her toast to family had not overlooked me by accident. It was a statement, a declaration, a cruel performance played for the benefit of those who knew nothing of the years behind us. I looked down at my hands folded on the table, the lines of age, the small tremor in my fingers. These were the hands that had rocked her to sleep, that had signed permission slips, that had written checks from my retirement to secure her first home. And now, those same hands sat idle in a place no one wanted filled. The weight of silence pressed on me more heavily than the noise around me. And yet, even as I sat there, humiliated, something within me hardened, quietly, like steel cooling into shape. I would not allow their whisper to erase me. I would not allow an empty chair to define my worth. I smiled faintly to myself, though no one noticed. They had drawn their line. They had placed me at the far edge, and without realizing it, they had given me the clarity to see exactly where I stood. When I finally returned home from the birthday dinner, I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and leaned against it for a moment, letting the silence swallow me. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses from earlier still echoed in my mind, but more than anything, it was the whisper that lingered. When will she finally be out of our lives? It seemed to follow me into every corner of the house, clinging to the walls like an unwelcome ghost. I walked through the dimly lit rooms, each step a reminder of the years I had poured into making this house a home, not just for myself, but for Marissa, too. This place had been the safe harbor after my husband passed, the space where I nursed my grief quietly while still showing strength for my daughter. I had believed that the sacrifices made within these walls were invisible threads tying us together, but tonight, those threads felt frayed and nearly broken. In the stillness, I remembered the day I withdrew $60,000 from my retirement savings to help Marissa and Victor purchase their house. It was almost 15 years ago. The memory came back with sharp clarity. The smell of the bank's polished floors, the way my hands trembled as I signed the papers, the pride I felt in helping her secure what I thought would be her foundation for a stable future. I had told myself it didn't matter if I went without, because she and her family would have a place to flourish. I found myself moving toward the old oak desk in the corner of my study. It had been my husband's once, but after he passed, it became the keeper of all my records. Birth certificates, tax returns, letters I couldn't throw away. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one that always stuck a little, and shuffled through the folders until my fingers brushed the envelope I was searching for. My heart tightened as I lifted it out and placed it on the desk. Inside were copies of the documents I had signed back then. There was the withdrawal slip from my retirement account, the cashier's check, and tucked among them, a handwritten note I had scrawled in my eagerness to assure Marissa she wouldn't need to worry. "This money is my gift to you. No need to repay me." At the time, I had believed it was an act of unconditional love. Now, reading those words, I realized I had bound myself with my own generosity. I had signed away any claim not just to the money, but to the respect that should have come with it. Beneath the note were the deeds and titles. My eyes scanned the lines, each detail etching itself into my mind. The house was in both Marissa and Victor's names. My name was nowhere. All the money I had given had bought me nothing. Not a stake, not a safeguard, not even acknowledgement. It was their home entirely, and I had been the invisible benefactor who could now be discarded. I sank into the chair, staring at the papers as if they might rewrite themselves if I waited long enough. But they didn't. They told the truth, and the truth was clear. My sacrifices had left me powerless in the very structure I had helped build. The humiliation from dinner twisted into something quieter, sharper. It wasn't just about being ignored at a table. It was about a lifetime of giving without guarding myself, a lifetime of assuming that love would naturally be returned. The tears came slowly, not with the force of grief, but with the weary weight of recognition. They slid down my cheeks as I pressed my hand against the letter I had written. I whispered aloud, "You trapped yourself, Kathy. You thought love was protection, but you gave away your shield." The house creaked around me as if agreeing. Still, even in that moment, a sliver of resolve stirred. Proof could wound, but it could also clarify. I now had in my hands the evidence of choices made, both theirs and mine. Evidence that explained how I ended up at the far end of the birthday table, seated in humiliation. Evidence that revealed why Marissa felt she could erase me. They owned the house outright, and I had no paper trail to contest it. But these documents also reminded me of something else. I was still alive. I still had choices left to make, even if I had failed to protect myself in the past. I slid the papers back into the envelope and closed the drawer slowly. The wood thudded shut with a finality that echoed through the quiet room. My hand lingered on the handle, the metal cool under my palm. For years, I had carried the belief that my sacrifices secured my place in my daughter's heart. Tonight, I understood differently. They had secured her independence, yes, but at the cost of my voice. I stood, wiping the traces of tears from my face. The humiliation had not broken me completely. It had opened my eyes. And though I felt the ache of betrayal pressing heavy, there was a steadiness growing beneath it. I had proof now, not the kind that would take me back into ownership, but the kind that would prevent me from living in illusions any longer. I turned off the light in the study and stood in the hallway, the envelope clutched in my hand. The air was still, the night pressing close outside the windows. I carried the proof with me, not as a weapon yet, but as a reminder. My next steps would not be taken in blindness. Morning after the birthday dinner, I stood at my kitchen sink staring out the window, my hands resting on the cool porcelain. The pie plate from the night before sat untouched on the counter, the crust beginning to harden, a reminder of the humiliation I had carried home with me. The papers from the drawer lay neatly stacked on my desk in the study, waiting for me to decide what they meant for my future. My chest felt heavy, not from the silence of the house, but from the realization that silence within myself was no longer enough. I heard a soft knock at the back door, and when I opened it, I found Helen Ortiz standing there, holding a thermos of coffee and wearing her usual bright smile. Helen lived 3 houses down and worked at the fire station. She was the kind of neighbor who always had an eye out, someone who never let you slip too far into your own loneliness. "You were quiet last night," she said gently as I let her in. "I saw you leave early. Do you want to talk about it?" We sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our cups. I told her everything. The whisper in the hallway, the empty chair, the toast to family that had erased me. My voice trembled, but I didn't cry. The tears had already come in the study when I looked down at the proof of what I had lost. Now I felt more hollow than raw, as if the grief had carved out a space waiting to be filled by something else. Helen listened without interrupting, her brow furrowed, her hands folded around her cup. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Kathy, I hate to say this, but I'm not surprised," she said. "I've seen the way Marissa looks at you in public, the way Victor positions himself between you and her, like he's guarding her against you. It's cruel. But you need to know something. You're not the only one who has been through this." I looked at her startled. Helen rarely spoke about her own family. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "My son stopped speaking to me 5 years ago. He told me I was holding him back, that he needed distance to build the life he wanted. Distance became silence, and silence became nothing at all. I haven't heard his voice in half a decade. People like us, Kathy, we give and give because that's what mothers do. But sometimes that giving becomes a rope they use to pull themselves away." Her words sank into me with the weight of recognition. I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "I'm so sorry, Helen." She nodded. "It still hurts, but I learned something. You can't change the choices they make. What you can do is protect yourself. Don't let their rejection strip you of everything. Don't let it take your roof, your security, your sense of self. That's why you need help, Kathy. Not the kind of help that comes from neighbors bringing casseroles. I mean legal help. You need to talk to someone who knows how to shield what's yours." The thought of bringing lawyers into my private heartbreak felt strange, even harsh. I had lived my life believing that family mattered more than contracts, that love was stronger than paperwork. But as I thought of the envelope in my study, of the letter where I had written, "No need to repay me," I knew Helen was right. Love alone hadn't been enough to protect me. "Do you know someone?" I asked quietly. Helen's eyes softened. "I do. Mr. Dunbar. He's older now, retired technically, but he still helps people like us when it matters. He's not just sharp, he's fair. He won't tell you what you want to hear, but he'll tell you what you need to know. And Kathy, you need to know where you stand before Marissa and Victor decide for you." I stared into my cup, the coffee cooling in my hands. The thought of sitting across from a lawyer, admitting that my own daughter and her husband had maneuvered me into this corner, was humiliating. But I also felt the faintest flicker of relief. If someone could put boundaries where my love had failed, maybe I could breathe again. Helen reached into her bag and pulled out a small notepad. She scribbled a number and slid it across the table. "Call him. Don't wait. Every day you wait gives them more room to act like you don't matter. And Kathy, you do matter. You're one of the strongest women I know, even if you don't feel that way right now." Her words brought an unexpected warmth to my chest. For the first time since the whisper in the hallway, I felt seen, not erased. I closed my hand around the note, as if it were a lifeline. "Thank you, Helen." "Really," she smiled. "Neighbors look out for each other. That's how we survive the fires of life." Her voice softened again. "And Kathy, don't ever believe you're alone. You have people, even if they're not the ones you raised." After she left, I stood in the quiet kitchen holding the note with Mr. Dunbar's number. The morning light spilled across the counter, catching the glint of the pie tin, still untouched. I picked it up, carried it to the sink, and washed it clean. As the warm water ran over my hands, I realized that what I had given Marissa all these years had been love without protection. Helen had shown me that love, to survive, sometimes needed walls, doors, and locks. I dried the plate, set it in the cupboard, and walked toward the study where the envelope of proof waited. I felt a steadiness in my step that hadn't been there the night before. If Marissa and Victor had chosen to treat me as disposable, then it was time I chose to treat myself as worth defending. I dialed the number Helen had given me the very next morning. My hand shook slightly as I held the phone, though my voice remained steady when a receptionist answered and connected me to Mr. Dunbar. His tone was warm, tinged with the gravel of age, but firm in a way that made me think of my father's generation. Men who carried the weight of words. Carefully? He agreed to meet me that afternoon in his office downtown. Walking into his office was like stepping into another time. The wooden shelves sagged with decades of law books, their spines cracked and faded. The desk bore scratches from years of use, and a brass lamp cast a soft yellow light over a stack of papers. Mr. Dunbar himself rose slowly from his chair to greet me. A tall man with a slight stoop, his eyes sharp behind rimmed glasses. "Kathy Whitmore," he said, grasping my hand firmly. "It's been too long." We had known each other years ago, back when my husband was alive. He had helped us with our wills, simple documents at the time, more about peace of mind than necessity. Seeing him again made something inside me ache with both comfort and sorrow. He gestured to the leather chair across from him, and I sat down, smoothing the hem of my skirt with nervous fingers. I laid the envelope on the table between us. "I need to know where I stand," I said softly, "and where I don't." He nodded, slipping the documents from the envelope and reading each page with careful attention. His silence was heavy, punctuated only by the occasional clearing of his throat or the scratch of his pen as he underlined something. I waited, my heart sinking further with every minute. When he finally looked up, his expression was steady but serious. "You gave them this money outright," he said. "Your own letter here makes it clear. A gift, not a loan, and you sign nothing to protect your interest in the house, that property belongs to Marissa and Victor. Legally, you can't take it back. The words fell like stones into the pit of my stomach. I nodded slowly, though my fingers gripped the arms of the chair tightly. So there's nothing I can do? He leaned back, folding his hands together. Not to reclaim the house, no. That part is gone. But don't mistake that for powerlessness. Kathy, you still have assets. You still have control over what remains yours, your savings, your accounts, your future estate. If you want to ensure they can't strip more from you, that's where we focus. His calm voice steadied me. How? I asked. He pulled a yellow pad closer and began jotting notes. You establish a trust. You dictate exactly where your assets go and under what conditions. You can decide what Marissa inherits, or whether she inherits at all. You can protect everything from being touched without your consent. It won't change the past, but it can change the future. I studied his handwriting as he spoke, the way his pen pressed firmly into the paper. A trust. It was a concept I'd heard in passing, something wealthy families used in novels or movies. It never occurred to me that a retired teacher like myself could wield such a tool. Wouldn't that seem harsh? I murmured. Mr. Dunbar met my eyes with quiet intensity. What's harsh, Kathy, is letting them decide your worth. You've given. Enough. Now you decide what happens with what you have left. Think of it not as punishment, but as preservation. You're not shutting doors, you're locking the right ones. The phrase struck me, echoing Sister Evelyn's words from years past, locking the right doors. I felt a ripple of resolve move through me, small but insistent. What about the accounts? I asked. He nodded. We'll remove Victor's name if it appears anywhere, ensure Marissa has no access, and appoint someone you trust to oversee matters if you become unable. Do you have someone? I thought for a moment. My circle was small, but Clara at the bank had always been kind, meticulous, discreet. Yes, I said finally. I believe I do. Good, he said, his voice approving. You'll need to act swiftly. They may already be making plans under the assumption that your resources are theirs. We'll make sure that assumption dies here. For the first time in days, I felt something stir that was not humiliation or grief. It was small, like the first crack of light slipping through blinds in the morning, but it was enough to breathe differently. I sat taller in my chair, feeling the strength of the leather beneath me. Thank you, I said, my voice firmer than before. I didn't know where else to turn. He smiled faintly. That's why I'm still here. People forget that law isn't just about fighting in court. It's about giving people choices when they think they have none. You have choices, Kathy. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. When I left his office, the late afternoon sun bathed the street in golden light. The traffic hummed. People hurried past carrying briefcases and shopping bags, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing without pause. But inside me, something had shifted. I clutched the folder of notes and instructions he had given me, not as a burden, but as a map. Walking back to my car, I thought about the empty chair at the birthday table, the way it had made me feel erased. For the first time, I understood that being pushed aside could also open a new path. I had spent my life believing that dignity came from enduring. Now I was beginning to see that dignity also came from protecting, from deciding, from refusing to be erased any longer. As I started the engine and pulled into the flow of traffic, I whispered to myself, I still have choices. And for the first time since that night in the hallway, the words did not sound hollow. The very next morning, I woke with a heaviness that pressed me back into the mattress, but I forced myself to rise. Mr. Dunbar's words echoed in my mind, steady and undeniable. I had choices. That meant I needed to act, not simply sit in my kitchen counting the years I had lost. I dressed simply, pulling on a navy cardigan and smoothing my hair into place. With the envelope of documents tucked securely into my bag, I drove to the bank where I had kept my accounts for decades. The white lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, a mixture I had always found comforting. Today it felt different. Every step across the tiled floor carried a weight, as though I were reclaiming ground that had been quietly stolen from me. Clara Jennings greeted me at the desk, her familiar smile easing some of the tension in my chest. She had helped me for years, calm, attentive, the sort of person who made you feel that even the smallest request mattered. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," she said warmly. "How can I help you today?" I lowered my voice slightly, leaning closer. "I need to make some changes." "Important ones." Her expression grew serious immediately. She gestured toward a small office off the lobby. Once we were inside with the door closed, she invited me to sit. I placed the folder on her desk and explained what I needed. Victor's name removed from every place it appeared, my accounts secured solely under my control, and the first steps taken toward establishing the trust Mr. Dunbar had outlined. My voice trembled at first, but as the words left my mouth, they grew steadier. Clara listened without interruption, her pen poised above her notepad. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "I understand," she said. "I'll need your signatures, and we'll go line by line to ensure nothing remains vulnerable. It may take some time, but we'll get it done." Her calm efficiency soothed me. She spread the papers across the desk, sliding each toward me in turn. With every signature, I felt something loosen inside me, a knot untangling, a rope fraying where it had bound me. Removing Victor's access was more than a financial act. It was a declaration. I was no longer his liability, no longer a passive figure waiting to be erased. As I signed, Clara glanced at me. "You know, not everyone would take this step." Many people hesitate, worried about how their families will react, but protecting yourself isn't selfish, Mrs. Whitmore. It's wise. Her words steadied my hand as I scrawled my name across another line. "I've lived too long believing that love was enough," I said quietly. "It isn't. Not when love is used as leverage." Clara paused, her eyes softening. "I see more of this than you'd think. Parents giving, children taking, until there's nothing left but resentment. But you're not powerless. You're making sure your voice stays in the story." The printer hummed, spitting out fresh documents. The sound was strangely reassuring, like a metronome marking each beat of change. I signed again and again until my name formed a rhythm across the pages. Each stroke of ink was a boundary drawn, a line declaring, "This far, no further." When the final paper slid toward me, Clara placed her hand lightly on the edge. "I'll be your point of contact," she said firmly. "If anyone tries to access these accounts without your consent, I'll know. And I'll call you directly. You won't be blindsided again." Her loyalty, unasked for but freely given, caught me off guard. Gratitude rose in my throat, almost too sharp to speak around. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "We look out for people who've looked out for others their whole lives. It's your turn to be looked after." When I left the bank, the weight in my chest felt lighter. The autumn air carried the faint smell of rain, and the trees lining the street swayed gently, as if nodding approval. For the first time in weeks, I walked with a steadier step, the folder clutched to my chest like a shield. Driving home, I thought about the empty chair at Marissa's table, the way my granddaughter had rushed past without a glance, the way Victor's laugh had filled the room. Those memories still hurt, but they no longer defined me. They were reminders of why I needed to act, not anchors pulling me back. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Helen waving from her porch. She didn't ask what I had done. She simply lifted her coffee cup in salute as if she already knew. I smiled faintly and raised my hand in return, the small gesture carrying more weight than words could hold. Inside, I placed the updated documents in my desk drawer, this time not with dread, but with a sense of quiet victory. The house creaked softly around me, and for once it didn't feel like loneliness pressing in. It felt like the beginning of a defense, the first layer of walls built not to shut others out, but to keep myself safe within. I sat down at the desk, letting the silence settle, and whispered to myself, "You're not erased, Kathy. Not anymore." It was only 2 days after I had left the bank with my papers in order when the pounding started at my front door. At first, I thought it might be a delivery, some package left on the porch, but the rhythm of the knock was too sharp, too insistent. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. There he was, Victor, standing on my porch in his press suit, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the street before narrowing at my door. He looked less like a son-in-law and more like a man prepared for battle. I stood still for a long moment, my hand on the curtain. My first instinct was to open the door, to play the part I had always played, the polite mother-in-law who listened, who absorbed harsh words without pushing back. But something in me resisted. I had just begun to feel the steadiness that came from taking control at the bank, from signing my name across documents that cut his influence out of my life. I wasn't about to hand it back by opening the door. The knocking grew louder. "Kathy," he called, his voice sharp enough to carry through the wood. "We need to talk." "You've made a mistake." I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. His words weren't a request. They were an accusation. I could picture the way his lips curled when he used that word mistake, as though my independence was nothing more than foolishness. My breath steadied as I whispered to myself, "You don't have to answer." The knocking turned into pounding. "You're being unreasonable," he shouted. "This is about family, about responsibility. You're putting us in a difficult position." His use of the word family twisted like a knife. Only days ago, his wife had toasted to family without seeing me. Now he wielded the word as a weapon, a claim meant to shame me back into obedience. I pressed my hand flat against the wall, grounding myself in the quiet strength of the house around me. He stepped back from the door, his shadow shifting across the frosted glass. "You're a liability," he said loudly, each syllable cutting through the stillness of my living room. "Marissa and I can't keep carrying you." It's time you understood that the word slammed into me. Liability. It was cold, clinical, the language of ledgers and contracts. To him, I wasn't a mother or even a person. I was an obstacle, a risk, something to be eliminated for the sake of convenience. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink into me, not to wound me, but to reveal him. Finally, his mask had slipped. I stayed silent, unmoving. After a few moments, his tone shifted, lower, almost coaxing. "Look, Kathy, I know you've been upset. I know you think we don't appreciate you, but you've gone too far. Taking my name off the accounts? Do you have any idea what kind of message that sends? People will think you don't trust your own family." I nearly laughed, though no sound left my lips. He was worried about appearances, about control, about what others might think. My trust had never mattered to him. Only my obedience had. When I didn't respond, he sighed heavily and rattled the doorknob. My heart raced, but the lock held. "Fine," he muttered. "If this is how you want to play it, don't expect us to be there when you need us." "You're cutting yourself off, not us." His footsteps thudded against the porch as he turned and strode down the steps. I waited until the sound of his car pulling away faded into the distance before I let my body relax. My knees trembled slightly as I sank into the armchair by the window. I drew in a long breath and released it slowly, as though I were exhaling not just air but decades of submission. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, charged with meaning. For the first time, Victor had spoken aloud what he had likely thought for years. that I was expendable, a liability. But instead of breaking me, it clarified everything. His knocking hadn't been a conversation, it had been a demand, and my silence, my refusal to answer, had been an answer in itself. I looked around the room, the framed photographs, the books stacked neatly on shelves, the small potted plant by the window. These were not liabilities. They were pieces of a life I had built with my own effort, pieces I was still capable of protecting. I wasn't a burden. I was a woman reclaiming what little she still had left. As the afternoon light shifted across the floor, I found myself whispering words I hadn't planned. You don't own me, Victor. And you never will. The sound of my own voice startled me, but it also steadied me. For years I had let silence be my prison. Now silence had become my shield. I knew he would tell Marissa what had happened. I knew they would both see my refusal to answer as defiance, maybe even betrayal. But the truth was simpler. It was survival. For once, I hadn't let them dictate the terms. I had chosen not to open the door, and that choice was mine alone. As evening crept in, I lit a lamp and settled into the stillness. The knocking might echo in my ears for a while, but I knew it marked a turning point. Their view of me as a liability had been spoken into the open, and from that moment, I resolved never to let their words shape who I was again. The morning after Victor's pounding at my door, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, staring at the steam curling upward as though it could carry away the heaviness in my chest. My hands were steadier than they had been in days, but inside I was still unsettled. I kept replaying the sound of his voice calling me a liability, yet beneath the sting, there was also a strange calm. He had revealed himself plainly, and I had chosen silence over surrender. For the first time in years, I felt the faint outline of my own strength. I set the cup down on the side table and reached for the journal I had begun to keep. The pages already held fragments, lines about the empty chair, the papers in the drawer, Helen's advice. I had never been a woman to dwell on herself, but writing felt like stitching something back together, thread by thread. My pen hovered above the paper when my phone buzzed on the table beside me. The sound startled me. I rarely received messages anymore. When I looked at the screen, I saw a name I hadn't expected. Lila, my granddaughter. The girl who had rushed past me at the birthday dinner, too absorbed in her world to notice her grandmother's humiliation. My heart jumped in my chest as I opened the message. I'm sorry, Grandma. Can I see you? Just me. Please. I read the words twice, unsure if my eyes were tricking me. It was the first time she had reached out to me directly in months. I sat back, clutching the phone as a mixture of relief and apprehension washed over me. Did she mean it? Was this genuine, or was she simply sent as an envoy by her parents? The thought made me hesitate. Still, there was something raw in her message, something fragile that I couldn't ignore. I typed slowly, carefully, "Yes, you can come. Only you, no one else." Her reply came almost instantly. "I promise." The rest of the day stretched long with anticipation. I cleaned the house more thoroughly than it needed, polished the table, laid out a plate of cookies from a recipe she used to love when she was younger. I even found the old sketchbook she had once used when she was little, pages filled with drawings of our garden, stick figures of us holding hands. I set it on the table beside the cookies, unsure why, but hoping it might remind her of a time when love between us had been simple. When the knock finally came, it was soft, hesitant. I opened the door, and there she stood, 16 now, taller than I remembered, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes rimmed with uncertainty. She stepped inside quickly, glancing over her shoulder as though she didn't want to be seen. "Thank you for letting me come," she said, her voice low. I smiled gently, guiding her into the living room. "You don't need to thank me, Lila. This is your home, too." She sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisting in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing, and I let the silence stretch, giving her space. Finally, she whispered, "I heard what Mom said. About you being a burden." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I'm so sorry." My chest tightened, but I kept my expression calm. "It wasn't your fault, sweetheart." "None of it is." She shook her head quickly, eyes brimming with tears. I didn't say anything. I just stood there. I should have said something. But I was scared. "They always talk about you like you're—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "Like I'm in the way." I finished for her. She nodded miserably. I reached over, taking her hands in mine. "Lila, sometimes silence is what people use to protect themselves. I understand. You're young. You don't have to carry what isn't yours to carry. The fact that you're here now means more to me than you know." Her shoulders shook as she let out a shaky breath. "I miss you, Grandma. I miss how it used to be, when you'd walk me to the park or when you taught me how to bake. I feel like Mom and Dad don't want me to remember those things, but I do." Tears filled my eyes, though I blinked them back. "I remember too. And nothing they say can erase what we've shared. You'll always have that with me." She lifted her gaze, her eyes fierce despite the tears. "I don't want to lose you. I don't care what they say. You're not a burden. You're the only one who ever listened to me without judging." The words pierced me deeper than any insult Victor had thrown. In that moment, I saw not just my granddaughter, but a young woman searching for truth in a house filled with manipulation. She wasn't here to spy or to soften me. She was here because her heart ached, just as mine did. We sat together for a long while, nibbling at cookies, paging through her old sketches. She laughed softly when she saw the crooked flowers she had drawn at 7 years old, and I laughed with her, the sound of our voices mingling like music that had been missing too long. As the afternoon light slanted through the curtains, she grew quiet again. "Grandma," she said hesitantly, "Mom told me once that you'd always be a problem we'd have to solve. She said it when she thought I wasn't listening. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I don't want to believe her." Her confession sliced at me, but I forced myself to stay composed. "Lila, your mother has her own fears, her own choices. But her words don't define me, and they don't have to define you either. You have the power to decide what kind of life you want, who you keep close, and who you let go." She squeezed my hand tightly, as if anchoring herself to me. "I choose you." The words, so simple yet so profound, filled me with a hope I hadn't dared to feel. Perhaps the bonds I thought were severed completely still had threads strong enough to weave something new. When she finally left, the evening air was cool, the sky streaked with the last blush of sunset. I stood at the doorway watching her walk away, her steps lighter than when she arrived. My heart felt bruised but also fuller than it had in years. I closed the door softly, whispering to myself, maybe the future isn't as empty as they want me to believe. 2 days after Lila's visit, I awoke to the sound of church bells drifting faintly through my window. The chimes carried me back to years long past, when I used to walk arm in arm with an old friend down the steps of St. Mary's, both of us laughing at how we'd sung off-key in the choir. That friend was Evelyn. Back then, she was just another girl from the neighborhood, filled with wild ideas and laughter that shook the air. Now she wore a habit and a serene expression shaped by decades in service to God. We hadn't seen each other in years, but that morning she appeared at my door as if no time had passed. When I opened the door, she smiled softly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Kathy," she said, her voice warm yet deliberate. "I heard you've had a rough time. May I come in?" I stepped aside, a mixture of surprise and relief swelling in me. "Of course, Evelyn." Always she walked into my living room, her presence filling the space with a quiet calm. She settled into the armchair by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I brought her tea, and for a while we simply sat together in silence, the kind that didn't feel empty but restorative, as though words weren't required for her to understand. Finally, she looked at me with the same steady gaze she'd had as a young woman. "Helen told me," she said gently, "about what you overheard, about the way they've treated you." I lowered my eyes, ashamed even though I knew I shouldn't be. "I don't know how to make sense of it, Evelyn. I gave Marissa everything I had, and now she whispers about when I'll be gone, as if I've already overstayed my welcome in her life." Evelyn nodded, her face solemn. "I've seen this before." Blood doesn't always guarantee loyalty. Sometimes it only sharpens entitlement. She leaned forward slightly. "But Kathy, what matters now is not their betrayal, it's how you respond." Her words lingered in the air. "Respond?" I echoed, uncertain. "Yes," she said softly. "You cannot undo their choices, but you can choose yours." I've spent my life watching people come to the convent, broken by the cruelty of those they trusted most. And I've learned that forgiveness is not always about letting people back into your life. Sometimes forgiveness means locking a door at the right moment, not to shut love out, but to shut harm out. It is the act of saying, "You no longer get to wound me." I let her words settle deep inside me. For so long, I had equated forgiveness with endless endurance, with allowing the same wounds to be inflicted again and again. But what she described was different. It was forgiveness as protection. Forgiveness that preserved dignity. "I'm not sure I know how to do that," I admitted. "You do," Evelyn said with quiet certainty. "You've already begun. You didn't open the door to Victor. You didn't let his words define you. That was you locking the right door. Every step you've taken since is proof you still have agency." Her certainty soothed me more than I expected. I thought of the empty chair at the birthday dinner, of the envelope of proof in my drawer, of Victor pounding on my door, and of Lila whispering that she chose me. Each moment had shaped a new understanding. Maybe Evelyn was right. I was already practicing this kind of forgiveness, though I hadn't named it. We spoke for hours. She told me stories of women who had been cast aside by their families, who found strength in building lives on their own terms. She admitted, almost reluctantly, that her own brothers had once cut ties with her when she chose the convent, seeing her vocation as abandonment. "It took me years to realize their rejection was not my failure," she said. "It was their blindness. And once I saw that, I could forgive them, not by returning, but by living fully without their approval." I felt tears prick my eyes as I listened. The parallel was undeniable. My daughter's betrayal didn't erase the worth of my life. It only revealed the limits of her vision. When Evelyn finally rose to leave, she clasped my hands in hers. "Remember this, Kathy," she said firmly. "Every closed door is also an opening somewhere else. Do not spend your days staring at the one that's shut. Look for the one you can walk through." I walked her to the door, my heart steadier than it had been in weeks. As she stepped out into the fading afternoon light, I felt a strange blend of sorrow and hope. The pain was still there, sharp as ever, but it was no longer without direction. I knew now that the path forward wasn't about winning Marissa back. It was about reclaiming myself. As I closed the door behind her, I whispered the phrase she had given me, "Lock the right doors." It felt less like surrender and more like survival, a kind of wisdom I had needed all along. The morning after Evelyn's visit, I woke with her words still echoing in my ears, "Lock the right doors." I moved slowly through the kitchen, pouring coffee, staring out at the brittle autumn leaves swirling across the lawn. The house creaked around me, steady and old, and I thought of how much of myself I had given away inside these walls. Memories hung heavy, Marissa's first steps on the worn rug, her high school graduation photos still tucked in drawers, the countless evenings I stayed awake preparing lessons while she slept peacefully under my roof. Those sacrifices had been my gift, and she had chosen to repay them with whispers in a hallway. By mid-morning, I made my decision. I would not sit quietly with humiliation pressed against my chest. I would send her a message, not shouted, not bitter, but undeniable. I pulled an old wooden box from the closet, one that had belonged to my mother. Inside were scraps of fabric, faded ribbons, and unused cards saved over decades. I chose a small box, lined it carefully, and placed inside nothing but a folded note written in my own hand. On the outside of the envelope, I wrote simply, "This is all I have left for you." I packed the box gently, smoothing the paper as if it were something delicate. Then I sealed it shut with brown twine, the kind I once used to wrap Marissa's birthday presents when she was a little girl, and I could not afford shiny bows. Back then, she had squealed with delight no matter how plain the package looked. Now, I suspected her reaction would be very different. At the post office, I slid the box across the counter, my fingers lingering for a brief second before I let go. The clerk weighed it, stamped it, and placed it in the outgoing bin without a second thought. For him, it was just another parcel among hundreds. For me, it was the sharpest line I had ever drawn. A gift returned, an inheritance revoked in symbolism before it would be revoked in law. The rest of the day passed quietly. I folded laundry, watered my plants, read a book without absorbing the words. My mind stayed with that box, traveling in spirit as it moved from counter to truck to mailbox. By evening, I knew she would have it in her hands. I pictured her opening it, expecting something precious, perhaps money, perhaps jewelry, perhaps one more sacrifice to prove my loyalty. Instead, she would find emptiness, save for the note that told the truth. There was nothing left for her to take. That night, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I hesitated before reaching for it, already sensing the storm waiting inside. Sure enough, the screen lit up with Marissa's name. Her message was long, broken into jagged sentences. "How dare you? After everything we've done for you, you humiliate me like this. You made me look like a fool in front of Victor. Do you know what? People would think if they saw that you're bitter, ungrateful, selfish. No wonder no one wants you around." I sat on the edge of the bed, reading her words again and again. They burned, yes, but they also confirmed what I already knew. To her, love had always been measured in usefulness, in what I could provide. The moment I stopped giving, I became her enemy. The empty box had struck its mark more deeply than any speech ever could. I typed no reply. I didn't need to defend myself against her rage. The silence would be my response, heavier than any argument. I turned off the phone and set it face down on the table. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, remembering the years when I believed our bond was unbreakable. I remembered holding her small hand as we crossed busy streets, staying up all night to make her costumes for school plays, saving every cent I could so she would never go without. Those memories remained mine, even if she now scorned them. But I also understood something new. Those years were gone, and the woman she had become no longer carried gratitude for what had built her life. She carried contempt. The symbolic act of sending her that box had not just cut a thread between us, it had shifted something inside me. I felt the faint beginning of release. For so long, I had allowed her to define my worth by what I gave. Now, I was showing her the truth. I had already given enough. There would be no more sacrifices demanded, no more silent erasures accepted. I drifted to sleep with that thought steady in my mind. For the first time since the whisper in the hallway, I no longer felt like a ghost haunting the edges of her life. I felt like a woman reclaiming her own. It was late afternoon when the knock came again, but this time it wasn't the angry pounding from before. It was measured, deliberate. 3 sharp raps that carried an air of control. I looked through the curtain and saw Victor standing there, his suit crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, his stance rigid. His expression was calm, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hand gripped the folder tucked under his arm. I considered ignoring him as I had before, but something in me shifted. I had locked my doors, both literal and figurative, but now I felt strong enough to open this one. Not to submit, but to stand. I turned the knob and pulled it open. "Kathy," he said smoothly, as if we were discussing nothing more serious than the weather, "we need to talk." I stepped back just enough to let him enter. He walked into the living room as though he owned it, his eyes sweeping across the furniture, the bookshelves, the photographs of Marissa as a child. He placed the folder neatly on the coffee table, then sat in the armchair opposite mine. "You've been making changes," he began. His tone was polite, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. "Removing my name from accounts. Establishing boundaries where there were none before. Sending my wife. Insulting packages. Do you realize the damage you're causing?" I folded my hands in my lap, keeping my voice steady. "I've realized the damage already done to me. I'm simply protecting what remains mine." His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Protection is one thing. Open hostility is another. Marissa is hurt. She feels betrayed. The irony nearly made me laugh, though I held it inside. "She felt no hesitation betraying me with her words at that birthday dinner," I said quietly. "Perhaps now she knows how it feels." Victor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Let me be very clear, Kathy. If you continue down this path, if you keep shutting us out, restructuring your finances, putting up walls, then we will have no choice but to treat you as an adversary. Do you understand? If you persist, you will no longer be family to us. You will be our enemy." His words were cold, precise, calculated to intimidate. But instead of trembling, I felt a strange calm rise in me, like the steady ground beneath my feet had finally returned. I looked directly into his eyes, refusing to flinch. "Then you'll finally see me," I said softly. The silence that followed was thick. His eyes narrowed, as though he hadn't expected me to meet him with anything but fear. He leaned back, exhaling sharply through his nose. "You're making a grave mistake," he said at last. "Marissa has built her life on the foundation you provided. Do you really want to jeopardize her future? Do you want your granddaughter to suffer because of your stubbornness?" The mention of Lila struck me, but I held my ground. Lila has already suffered, listening to her parents speak of me as if I were disposable. She deserves better than to learn that cruelty is normal. And if that means she must see me stand against her parents, then perhaps that will teach her something far more valuable than inheritance ever could. Victor's jaw tightened, his fingers tapping once against the arm of the chair. He was calculating, deciding whether pressing further would yield results. Finally, he rose, gathering the folder. "I'll say this once more. Stop this. Come back to reason. If you don't expect us at your side when you need care. Don't expect inclusion in this family ever again." I stood as well, my shoulders squared. "You've already shown me what your inclusion looks like, Victor. A chair at the end of a table no one wishes to share. I'd rather sit alone with dignity than be treated as nothing in your company." He paused at the doorway, turning back with a cold glare. "You think you're strong enough to stand against us? You'll regret this." I met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps. But regret is easier to bear than erasure." Without another word, he opened the door and left, his footsteps heavy on the porch. I closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment, my heart beating hard but steady. For once, I hadn't backed down. I hadn't softened my words or sought his approval. I had spoken the truth aloud, and it rang through me like a bell. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Dunbar. It was short, almost anticlimactic compared to the storm that had just passed. Trust documents finalized. Effective immediately, I stared at the words, feeling the corners of my mouth lift into the faintest of smiles. Victor had come with threats, with ultimatums, with the promise of cutting me off, but he was already too late. The moment he left my living room, the future he and Marissa had been counting on had slipped out of their reach. I closed my eyes, whispering into the quiet, "Then you'll finally see me." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The morning sun slanted through my kitchen blinds, casting thin stripes of light across the table where I sat with a cup of coffee. My mind replayed Victor's ultimatum, his voice dripping with threats, but Mr. Dunbar's message echoed even louder. The trust was finalized. Their grasp had already slipped. Still, I knew there was one more step I needed to take, something concrete that would sever the last tie binding me to their control. The house. It had been my shelter, my memory keeper, but also my prison. Every corner reminded me of sacrifices made, of love given freely only to be dismissed. Holding on to it now felt like clinging to a chain. It was time to let it go. I called Paul Hargrove, the realtor Helen had recommended, and he agreed to meet me that afternoon. His office was small but orderly, framed photographs of houses he had sold hanging neatly on the walls. When he extended his hand, there was a steadiness in his grip, a quiet understanding in his eyes. He had the air of a man who had seen his share of heartbreak in transactions like mine. We sat across from each other at a wide oak desk. "So, Mrs. Whitmore," he began gently, "you're ready to sell?" "Yes," I answered, my voice firmer than I expected. "I've thought about it for weeks, and I know it's the right choice." This house has become a weapon in their hands, and I won't give them the satisfaction of watching me wither in it. Paul nodded, flipping open a folder. "I understand more than you know. A house is more than bricks and beams. It holds history, sometimes too much. Letting go isn't easy, but sometimes it's the only way forward." His words resonated. He handed me the paperwork, page after page requiring my initials, my signature, my consent. I picked up the pen, the weight of it significant in my hand. Each stroke of ink was a release, a declaration that I would not be tethered by walls built from memory and sacrifice. As I signed, Paul watched me quietly. "I went through something similar a few years back," he said after a moment. "My brother and I inherited our parents' home together. I thought it would keep us close, but it tore us apart. He wanted control, wanted to squeeze every dollar from it, and I wanted to preserve it. In the end, he cut me out. I sold my share to him, and for months I thought I'd made the wrong decision. But now, I see it freed me. I started over, built my own home, created my own peace." I paused mid-signature, looking up at him. There was no bitterness in his voice, only hard-earned wisdom. "That must have been painful," I said softly. "It was," he admitted, "but it also taught me something. A house doesn't define your worth. What you choose after does." His words settled in me like a steadying hand. I bent back over the papers, signing with new resolve. The sound of the pen scratching across the page was rhythmic, almost soothing. When I reached the final line, I pressed the pen firmly, sealing my decision with the weight of my name. Paul gathered the documents carefully, placing them into a neat stack. "It's done," he said. "We'll list it, we'll market it, and soon it will be someone else's to fill with their stories. For you, this is a clean slate," I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It felt as though a boulder had shifted off my shoulders. "Thank you," I murmured. He smiled. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for being brave enough to let go. Most people cling to walls long after the walls have stopped protecting them." We shook hands again, and I left his office with the faintest sense of lightness. The late afternoon sun touched my face as I stepped outside, and I tilted my head toward it, letting the warmth sink into my skin. For so long, I had lived beneath the shadow of my daughter's judgment, Victor's demands, and my own regrets. Now, with the stroke of a pen, I had carved out a new space for myself, a future unchained from their disdain. Driving home, I passed familiar streets, the school where I had taught for decades, the park where I had once pushed Marissa on the swings. Memories surfaced, but instead of binding me, they floated past like scenery. They were part of me, but they no longer dictated my steps. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat for a moment in the car, looking at the house. The windows reflected the fading light, and the porch creaked as a gust of wind passed. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake in that house, worrying over bills, the mornings I had watched Marissa walk to school with her backpack swinging. I thought of the evenings after my husband died, when the silence felt unbearable, but the house held me upright. Now it would hold someone else, and that was all right. I walked inside, set my bag down, and poured a glass of water. As I sipped, I realized I felt no grief, only release. The paperwork had not just ended in ownership, it had closed a chapter. The walls no longer had power over me. That night, as I prepared for bed, I placed Paul's business card on the nightstand. His story of betrayal and resilience echoed. In my mind, a reminder that healing didn't come from clinging, but from letting go. I whispered into the quiet, "You are more than this house, Kathy. You are more than what they tried to take." And for the first time, I believed it. The envelope arrived on a gray morning, slipped through the mail slot with the soft thud of finality. I knew immediately it was from Marissa. Her handwriting was sharp, impatient, as if each letter had been carved rather than written. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat staring at it, the edges digging into my fingers. For years, I had longed for notes from her, even brief ones, holiday cards, thank you letters, little scraps of affection. Now, after everything, I held a letter that felt less like a gift and more like a weapon. I tore it open and unfolded the paper. Her words were scrawled fast, jagged. She accused me of betrayal, of embarrassing her in front of Victor, of destroying the family by pulling away. She painted herself as the victim, claiming she had only ever done what was best. Line after line, she blamed me for choices she and her husband had made, as though my refusal to remain silent had cracked her world apart. Not once did she acknowledge the whisper I had overheard, the cruel toast, the empty chair. She never mentioned the years I had supported her or the sacrifices I had made. The letter was not reconciliation, it was a condemnation. I read it twice, my eyes skimming faster the second time, until the words blurred together. By the end, my hands shook, not from hurt, but from clarity. There was nothing more she could say to me that I hadn't already heard in silence at that table. Her voice on paper only confirmed what I already knew. The daughter I had raised was gone, replaced by someone who could not see me as anything but an obstacle. I folded the letter once, set it on the counter, then struck a match. The flame caught quickly, curling the edges black, sending smoke into the air. I held it carefully over the sink until it was nothing but ash. Watching it crumble felt like laying something to rest, like closing a door that had already slammed in my face. The phone rang just as I rinsed the ashes down the drain. My first instinct was to let it go, but when I saw Lila's name on the screen, I answered immediately. Her voice trembled on the other end. "Grandma? Can I come over? Please, I don't know what to do." My heart clenched. "Of course, sweetheart. Are you all right?" She sniffled. "I had another fight with Mom and Dad. They keep saying awful things about you, and when I told them to stop, they told me I was being disrespectful. I can't take it anymore." I want to leave her words cracked something deep inside me. She was only 16, yet she was already carrying the weight of choosing sides, of trying to untangle love from manipulation. "Where are you?" I asked. "In my room," she whispered, "but I can't stay here." I don't feel like I belong. Not with them. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. Listen to me, Lila. You always belong with me. My door is open, always. But I need you to be careful. Don't rush. Wait until you feel safe to come. There was silence for a moment, then a soft sob. I just want to be somewhere I'm not scared of saying what I feel. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced my voice to stay calm. You will have that, sweetheart. You don't need to live in fear of love. You deserve better. We spoke for a while longer, her words tumbling out in fragments, how she had overheard her parents arguing about me again, how Victor had called me selfish, how Marissa had said I was trying to ruin everything. Each word was another weight pressing down on her, yet in her voice I heard the faint echo of courage. She had chosen to call me. She had chosen to seek me out. That choice mattered more than all of their accusations combined. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, the faint smell of smoke from the burned letter lingering in the air. I thought of the contrast, Marissa's words, venomous and final, reduced to ash, and Lila's voice raw with fear but filled with truth. One daughter had closed the door, but a granddaughter was knocking on another. The difference was profound, and it filled me with both grief and hope. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard. The trees swayed gently, their branches almost bare, leaves scattering across the grass like remnants of a season that had ended. Yet beneath the starkness, I knew new buds would come in spring. Life had a way of beginning again, even when it seemed barren. That evening, I sat with my journal, writing down everything. The words in Marissa's letter, the ashes in the sink, the sound of Lila's trembling voice. I wrote not to dwell, but to mark the moment. Some things needed to be remembered not for pain, but for clarity. This was the moment I knew I could no longer look backward. The letter was the past, burned. Lila's call was the future, uncertain, but alive. I closed the journal and placed it on the table beside me. My heart ached, but it also beat with a steadier rhythm than it had in months. Forgiveness no longer meant excusing what had been done. It meant releasing myself from the chains of their words so I could reach toward the voice that still sought me. Before bed, I whispered into the quiet, "You may have lost your daughter, Kathy, but you are not lost. You are still here, and someone still needs you." The morning was quiet when I walked into Mr. Dunbar's office, the autumn light filtering softly through the blinds. The air smelled faintly of leather and old books, and the low hum of the heater filled the silence. I carried with me a folder of documents, though my heart carried something heavier, a mixture of weariness and resolve. After burning Marissa's letter, after hearing Lila's trembling voice asking for a way out, I knew this step wasn't only for me. It was for every woman who had ever been told her worth expired when she stopped giving. Mr. Dunbar rose as I entered, his glasses slipping slightly down his nose. "Kathy," he said warmly, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk, "I have everything prepared. Are you ready?" I nodded, setting my purse down. "I've been ready longer than I realized," I said. He spread the documents before me, each one neatly tabbed, each line deliberate. "This trust will secure your estate. It will dictate exactly where your assets go, how they are managed, and who has access. No one, not Marissa, not Victor, can override what you sign here today. This is your safeguard. Your voice on paper." I listened as he explained the clauses, the language precise and measured. The trust named Lila as a beneficiary under specific conditions, but not Marissa or Victor. Another portion designated funds for a local women's shelter, a place I had once donated to quietly but never imagined including in something so permanent. As he spoke, I felt the strange sensation of doors closing behind me and new ones opening ahead. When he slid the first page toward me, I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what this meant. I pressed the tip firmly to the paper, signing my name with deliberate strokes. One page after another, my name unfurled across the lines. With every signature, I felt the past loosen its grip. The empty chair, the whisper in the hallway, the letters of accusation. They still existed, but they no longer held me hostage. Halfway through, I paused and looked at Mr. Dunbar. "Do you think this is selfish? Cutting them out so completely?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady on mine. "Selfishness is taking without giving. You've spent your life giving, Kathy. What you're doing now is claiming your right to peace. That isn't selfish. It's justice." The words settled deep inside me, soothing the last of my doubts. I bent back over the papers and continued. When I reached the final page, I hesitated. For a moment, I thought of Marissa as a little girl, running into my arms after her first day of school, her backpack bouncing behind her. I thought of nights spent stitching her dresses, of mornings spent packing her lunches. Love had been my compass then. Love had guided every choice. But love without boundaries had left me erased. Now I understood that protecting myself did not erase what I had given. It honored it. I signed the last line, setting the pen down with a quiet exhale. Mr. Dunbar smiled faintly. "It's done. From this moment, everything you've worked for is protected. They cannot touch it." Relief washed over me, quiet but powerful. I sat back, folding my hands in my lap. "I'd like part of it to go to the shelter," I said firmly, "for women who've been told they don't matter. For women who need to know they do." He nodded approvingly. "It will be written exactly as you've asked. That one line in your trust could change lives you'll never meet." I imagined those women, strangers whose names I would never know, finding shelter, finding strength, finding hope in a place funded by my decision. It made the act of signing more than just self-preservation. It made it an offering, a legacy rooted not in bitterness, but in renewal. When I left his office, the weight I carried for months felt lighter. The city street outside bustled with ordinary life. Cars honking, children tugging at their mothers' coats, a man selling roasted chestnuts from a cart. I walked slowly, the cool air brushing my face, and for the first time in years, I felt the rhythm of my own steps as something steady and free. At home, I placed the signed copies into the drawer of my desk, but this time the act wasn't heavy. It was deliberate, almost ceremonial. The drawer closed with a soft click, not the sound of entrapment, but of assurance. That evening, I brewed a pot of tea and sat by the window. The sky had darkened, the first stars peeking through, faint and determined. I thought of Lila, of her small voice saying, "I choose you." I thought of Evelyn reminding me to lock the right doors. I thought of Helen handing me Dunbar's number with unshakable kindness. And I thought of myself, standing tall even when my own daughter tried to cut me down. I lifted my cup, whispering into the stillness, "This is for the women told they didn't matter." The words floated upward, dissolving into the quiet night like a prayer. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a place where I had made a choice, one that would ripple far beyond my walls. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the tea fill me, certain that though my family had tried to erase me, I had reclaimed something far greater. The kettle whistled softly as I moved around the kitchen, arranging mismatched teacups on a tray. For years, my table had been a place of silence, a place where I ate alone and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. That day, it was different. I had invited a few women from the neighborhood, Helen, of course, and Evelyn, along with two others I had known only in passing, but who had shown me kindness in small ways. It wasn't a grand affair, just a simple gathering over tea, but the act of opening my door to companionship felt like a kind of revolution. I spread a linen cloth across the table, one that had belonged to my mother. The edges were frayed, but I smoothed it down with care. The cookies I had baked filled the room with the scent of butter and sugar, and a small vase of garden flowers brightened the center. As I set everything in place, I caught myself smiling at the sight. It had been a long time since my home felt prepared for welcome rather than defense. When the knock came, it was gentle. Helen entered first, carrying a basket of scones. "I thought we might need extra," she said, her eyes twinkling. Evelyn followed, her habit catching a bit of sunlight from the window. Behind them were Mrs. Lane from 2 doors down and Margaret, who often waved to me from her porch, but had never before stepped inside my home. They each carried something small, a jar of jam, a tin of shortbread, a smile that spoke of simple generosity. We sat around the table, steam rising from the cups as the conversation began. At first it was polite, talk of gardens and the shifting weather, but soon it turned deeper. Helen shared stories from the fire station, the small tragedies and quiet triumphs she witnessed daily. Margaret spoke of her daughter moving far away and the loneliness that sometimes crept in. Evelyn, calm as ever, reminded us all that loneliness was not absence, but an invitation to connection if we were brave enough to reach for it. I listened, my hands wrapped around the warm porcelain of my cup. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. Their voices wove together like threads of a tapestry, each one distinct but forming something stronger as they overlapped. In the middle of this gentle hum, there was another knock at the door. My heart skipped when I opened it to find Lila standing there, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her cheeks flushed as though she had walked quickly. She hesitated at the threshold, looking both nervous and hopeful. "Grandma," she said softly, "I hope I'm not interrupting." I reached for her hand, guiding her inside. "You could never interrupt." The women greeted her kindly, and she smiled shyly as I found her a chair. She pulled something from her bag and placed it on the table, a sketchbook worn at the corners. She flipped it open to a page she had drawn recently. It showed me, sitting at a chessboard, my eyes fixed on the pieces as though planning a move. Across from me was a shadowed figure, indistinct, blurred as though unimportant. "I made this last night," she said, her voice trembling just slightly, "because I think you're still playing, Grandma. You're not done. You're starting your own game." The room fell silent. I felt the sting of tears, but they didn't fall. I traced the lines of her drawing with my eyes, the sharp angles of the board, the careful detail she had given to my face. It wasn't a portrait of defeat. It was a portrait of endurance, of strategy, of beginning again. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You see me, Lila," I whispered, "and that's the greatest gift." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "I don't want to be like them. I don't want to lose you." The women around the table watched quietly, their presence like a soft circle of support around us. Helen broke the silence first, her voice warm. "That's the thing about families," she said. "We can build them, even when the ones we're born into let us down." Evelyn nodded. "Blood may fail us, but love never does, if we're willing to recognize it where it appears." We shared tea and stories late into the afternoon, the light fading gently outside the windows. Lila laughed at Helen's firehouse tales, listened intently to Evelyn's wisdom, and shyly offered her own opinions about school, about art, about dreams she hadn't dared to voice at home. She was no longer just my granddaughter. She was becoming her own person, brave enough to choose honesty over silence. When the gathering ended and the women drifted out into the evening, Lila lingered. She hugged me tightly, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I'll come back soon, Grandma. I promise." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, a mix of shampoo and the faintest trace of paint. "I'll be here," I told her. After she left, I sat alone at the table, the empty cup still warm, the chessboard sketch lying in front of me. I studied it once more, my fingers brushing over the penciled lines. She was right. I wasn't finished. I was starting a new match, One played on my terms, with rules I chose for myself. I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the peace of the day settle into my bones. For the first time in a long time, I felt not just defended but surrounded by a community, by love freely given. And most of all, I felt the flicker of a future that belonged to me. The day Marissa came to my door was colder than the others, the kind of chill that settled into the bones and made the air itself sharp. I had just finished clearing the teacups from the gathering when I heard the pounding. It wasn't Victor's controlled rhythm this time. It was frantic, hurried, filled with the rawness of desperation. I opened the door, and there she was, Marissa, her hair disheveled, her eyes wild with fury. She didn't wait to be invited. She pushed past me, storming into the living room like a storm cloud, her heels clattering against the floor. "How could you?" she shouted, her voice shaking with anger. "How could you humiliate me like this? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I closed the door quietly, leaning against it for a moment before turning to face her. She stood in the center of the room, her hands clenched at her sides. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl she once was, the one who had begged me to braid her hair before school, who had pressed drawings into my hand with the words, "For you, Mommy." But that image dissolved as quickly as it surfaced, replaced by the hardened woman in front of me. "What I've done," I said evenly, "is protect what is mine." Her laugh was bitter, harsh. "Protect? You've destroyed everything. Victor found out this morning that you finalized the trust. Do you realize what that means for us? For me?" "Yes," I replied softly. "It means you and Victor no longer have the power you thought you did. It means my life, my work, my savings, my home. It will not pass through your hands to be squandered or used against me. It means you can no longer treat me as an afterthought while waiting for me to disappear." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "You don't get to cut me out. I'm your daughter. Everything you have should come to me. That's how it works. Parents provide, children inherit. That's the order of things." I walked to the desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a single folder. Inside was the copy of the finalized trust. I laid it gently on the table between us, sliding it toward her. She snatched it up, flipping through the pages with trembling fingers. Her face changed as her eyes scanned the lines. Shock first, then disbelief, then fury so sharp it seemed to burn in her cheeks. "You left me nothing," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "That was your final mistake, Marissa. You believed my love was endless and unconditional, even when you turned it into scorn. You thought you could erase me from your life and still collect the pieces of mine. But love is not a contract. Respect is. And you broke it." She threw the folder down onto the table, the papers scattering across the wood. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll be alone, with no one to take care of you. Do you think these people you've surrounded yourself with, neighbors, lawyers, even Lila, do you think they'll stay? Family is all that lasts, and you've just destroyed yours." Her words stung, but they no longer pierced. I stood tall, my hands resting on the back of a chair. Family isn't about bloodlines scribbled on paper. It's about who shows up, who sees you, who doesn't whisper behind your back about when you'll be gone. By that measure, you destroyed this family long before I signed those papers. For a moment, silence stretched between us, broken only by the sound of her unsteady breathing. She looked around the room as though searching for an anchor, but found none. At last, her shoulders slumped, and the anger on her face twisted into something closer to desperation. "You've ruined me," she said, her voice low, almost pleading. "No," I said gently. "You've ruined what you hoped to take from me." "There's a difference." She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. She gathered the scattered papers into a clumsy pile and shoved them back into the folder. For the first time, I saw not power in her, but panic. She had gambled on my silence and lost. "I won't forget this," she muttered, heading for the door. I followed her, not to stop her, but to ensure the door closed behind her. She turned once at the threshold, her face pale, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you've won. But you'll see. You'll regret pushing me away." I opened the door wide. The cold wind rushed in, rattling the curtains. "I already regret many things, Marissa," I said quietly, "but not this." She stepped out, the sound of her heels fading down the walkway. I stood in the doorway until she disappeared from view, the trust folder still clutched in her hands. When I finally closed the door, the house felt different. Emptier, perhaps, but also freer. I leaned against the door, my heart heavy, yet strangely calm. The confrontation had been inevitable, and now it was over. For the first time, I no longer feared what she or Victor might do. The trust was sealed, my voice protected. Their whispers, their ultimatums, their rage. It no longer held power over me. I walked back to the table, gathering the stray papers she had left behind. As I stacked them neatly, I thought of Lila's sketch of the chessboard. Yes, the game was still being played, and for the first time I held the advantage, not because I sought to win at her expense, but because I had chosen a life not ruled by her scorn. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I closed my eyes, whispering to myself, "That was your final mistake." The day after Marissa stormed out of my house, the silence felt heavier than usual. It wasn't the silence of peace or even the silence of solitude. It was the silence of finality, the kind that lingers after a door has been slammed. I went about my morning chores slowly, dusting shelves, folding linens, watering plants, all while the echoes of her voice replayed in my mind. The accusations, the fury, the disbelief, every word clung to me, but none of it carried the power it once had. Her anger no longer defined me. It only revealed her desperation. By late afternoon, I had settled into my armchair with a book when the knock came again. This time it was softer, uneven. I knew before I rose who it was. My feet carried me to the door with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. When I opened it, Marissa stood there again, her face pale, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. She looked smaller somehow, though I knew it was the weight of pride crumbling at the edges. "Mom," she said, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Please, we need to talk." I didn't invite her in right away. I held the door open, my hand resting lightly on the frame. She shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, as if the balance of power had finally shifted and she wasn't sure how to stand in it. "There's nothing left to discuss," I told her calmly. "I gave you every chance to see me, to respect me. You chose otherwise." Her eyes filled with tears, though I couldn't tell if they came from grief or frustration. I was angry. "I didn't mean everything I said." I shook my head. "You whispered your truth long before you shouted your anger. I heard it in that hallway on your birthday. You wanted me out of your life, and now I've given you exactly what you asked for." She reached for the edge of the door, her hand trembling. "I can't believe you would do this to your own daughter." The words might once have cut me to the bone, but now they slid past me like shadows. "You stopped being my daughter the day you decided I was disposable," I said gently, without malice, "and I stopped being your victim the moment I signed those papers." For a long moment we stood in silence. She searched my face for some trace of weakness, some flicker of hesitation she could exploit, but I had none left to give. My heart ached, yes, but it was steady. Finally, I drew a long breath and spoke the words that had been forming inside me for months. "This is goodbye, Marissa. I love the child you once were, but I cannot love the cruelty you've chosen. I am closing this door now, for my own sake." Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. She stood frozen, staring at me as though she couldn't quite believe I had the strength to say it aloud. Then, with a sharp inhale, she turned and walked away, her footsteps fading down the path. I stood at the threshold for a moment longer, then slowly closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was louder than it should have been, echoing through the hallway, final and firm. My hand lingered on the wood, warm from the late sun, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The door was closed, not just to Marissa, but to years of humiliation, of erasure, of waiting for her love to return. The house felt lighter instantly. I walked back into the living room, the quiet no longer suffocating but cleansing. The space belonged to me again. My steps echoed differently on the floor, not weighed down by dread but lifted by release. As twilight deepened outside, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Lila. Just 5 words, simple and bright. "I'll be there Thursday with cookies." I smiled, tears rising to my eyes. In those few words, she had offered me something her mother never could: recognition, affection, choice. She had chosen me, not because of obligation, but because she wanted to. That small message was a thread of hope, a reminder that love could skip a generation, but still bloom fresh and true. I placed the phone down gently, then moved through the house, closing the curtains for the night. Each small act, drawing fabric over glass, locking the latch, felt like a ritual of protection and peace. When I finally sat back in my chair, I reached for the sketch Lila had given me of the chessboard. The lines were steady, the pieces mid-game, my figure poised to make the next move. I studied it quietly, the truth settling into me. Closing a door wasn't the end of the match, it was the beginning of playing on my own terms. That night, I slept without dreams of betrayal or echoes of whispers. The door had closed, and I had survived the sound of it. More than that, I had chosen it, and in that choice, I found the first true taste of freedom. The apartment was small, but it was mine. Sunlight streamed through the east-facing windows in the mornings, spilling across the wooden floor and touching the walls with a quiet warmth. The furniture was modest: a second-hand sofa, a round kitchen table, a single bookshelf I had brought with me. Yet each item had been chosen by me alone, without the weight of anyone else's judgment. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living inside a space that reflected me, not the expectations of others. That morning, I brewed a pot of tea and set a single cup on the table. The steam rose gently, carrying with it the scent of chamomile. I sat down, letting the chair embrace me. It wasn't a chair pushed to the end of a crowded birthday table, ignored and unwanted. It was a chair of my own, at a table where my presence was enough. On the shelf beside me lay Lila's sketch. I had framed it in a simple wooden frame, and now it leaned against the wall, the chessboard frozen mid-game, my figure captured in thoughtful focus. Whenever I looked at it, I felt reminded that life was not over, only unfolding in new directions. The match was not about winning against someone else anymore. It was about playing with intention, with dignity, with choice. I opened my journal, its leather cover worn smooth by time. The pen hovered for a moment before I began to write. The words flowed easily, steady as the breath moving in and out of me. They asked when I would be out of their lives. The answer is simple: when I chose to live mine. I underlined the final phrase, not in anger but in affirmation. It was a truth that no one could erase. The phone buzzed on the table. A message from Lila lit the screen. "Running late, but I'll be there soon. I've got the cookies." I smiled, setting the phone aside. The thought of her walking through my door filled me with a joy so clean it left no trace of bitterness. She was the bridge between what had been lost and what could still be built. Her choice to love me reminded me that family could be rebuilt not through obligation, but through genuine connection. I rose and placed another cup on the table, ready for her. As I did, I thought about the path that had brought me here. The whisper at the birthday dinner, the humiliation of the empty chair, the late-night tears over old documents, the moment I burned Marissa's letter, the steady hand of Mr. Dunbar guiding me through legal words that became my shield, the quiet courage of Evelyn's wisdom, the scones Helen brought to my table, Paul's story of betrayal and release, and the final confrontation where I told my daughter goodbye. Each moment had cut me open, but each had also sown a seed. Now those seeds were sprouting into something steadier than I had ever known. When Lila finally knocked on the door, I opened it to find her holding a tin, her smile wide, her eyes bright. "Grandma," she said breathlessly, "I baked too many." "I hope you're hungry," I laughed, pulling her into an embrace. She smelled faintly of sugar and paint, the sense of both youth and creativity. "Always," I whispered. We sat together, at the table, dipping cookies into tea, crumbs scattering across the linen cloth. She showed me new sketches, this time of city streets, of quiet corners, of faces she had glimpsed in passing. I listened, encouraged her, marveled at the gift she carried. More than that, I felt the healing that came from being chosen, not tolerated. As evening settled, she curled into the sofa with her sketchbook, and I sat back in my chair, the warm glow of the lamp filling the room. I thought of the road ahead, smaller, simpler, yet mine to walk. There would still be moments of sorrow, memories that pierced when I least expected them. But there would also be nights like this, filled with laughter, tea, cookies, and the knowledge that I had reclaimed my seat in life. When Lila left, promising to return in a few days, I tidied the table and washed the cups. The apartment grew quiet again, but it was not an empty quiet. It was a gentle one, a companion rather than a burden. I sat once more at the table, opened my journal, and added a final line beneath what I had written earlier. "I am not gone. I am here, and here I am enough." The night deepened outside, stars scattering across the sky. I closed my eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over me. For years I had waited for someone else to give me a place at the table. Now I had built one of my own. And in that seat, with tea in my cup and strength in my heart, I finally felt whole.